The Woman at Seven Brothers by Wilbur Steele. From Land's End. I tell you, sir, I was innocent. I didn't know any more about the world at 22 than some do at 12. My uncle and aunt in Duxbury brought me up strict. I studied hard in high school, I worked hard after hours, and I went to church twice on Sundays. And I can't see it's right to put me in a place like this, with crazy people. Oh, yes, I know they're crazy. You can't tell me. As for what they said in court about finding her with her husband, that's the inspector's lie, sir, because he's down on me and wants to make it look like my fault. No, sir, I can't say as I thought she was handsome, not at first. For one thing, her lips were too thin and white, and her colour was bad. I'll tell you a fact, sir, that first day I came off to the light, I was sitting on my cot in the storeroom, that's where the assistant keeper sleeps at the Seven Brothers, as lonesome as I could be, away from home for the first time, and the water all round me, and, even though it was a calm day, pounding enough on the ledge to send a kind of a whoom, 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 whining up through all that solid rock of the tower. And when old Fedderson poked his head down from the living-room, with the sunshine above making a kind of bright frame around his hair and whiskers, to give me a cheery, "Make yourself to home, son," I remember I said to myself, "He's all right, I'll get along with him, but his wife's enough to sour milk." That was queer, because she was so much under him in age, along about 28 or so, and him nearer 50, but that's what I said, sir. Of course, that feeling wore off, same as any feeling will wear off sooner or later in a place like the Seven Brothers. Cooped up in a place like that, you come to know folks so well that you forget what they do look like. There was a long time I never noticed her, any more than you'd notice the cat. We used to sit of an evening around the table, as if you were Fedderson there and me here, and her somewhere back there in the rocker, knitting. Fedderson would be working on his Jacob's ladder, and I'd be reading. He'd been working on that Jacob's ladder a year, I guess, and every time the inspector came off with the tender he was so astonished to see how good that ladder was that the old man would go to work and make it better. That's all he lived for. If I was reading, as I say, I daren't take my eyes off the book, or Fedderson had me, and then he'd begin. What the inspector said about him, how surprised the member of the board had been that time to see everything so clean about the light, what the inspector had said about Fedderson's being stuck here in a second-class light, best keeper on the coast, and so on, till either he or I had to go aloft and have a look at the wicks. He'd been there 23 years, all told, and he'd got used to the feeling that he was kept down unfair. So used to it, I guess, that he fed on it, and told himself how folks ashore would talk when he was dead and gone. Best keeper on the coast, kept down unfair. Not that he said that to me. No, he was far too loyal and humble and respectful, doing his duty without complaint, as anybody could see. And all that time, night after night, hardly ever a word out of the woman. As I remember it, she seemed more like a piece of furniture than anything else. Not even a very good cook, nor over and above tidy. One day, when he and I were trimming the lamp, he passed the remark that his first wife used to dust the lens and take a pride in it. Not that he said a word against Anna, though. He never said a word against any living mortal. He was too upright. I don't know how it came about, or rather I do know, but it was so sudden and so far away from my thoughts that it shocked me, like the world turned over. It was at prayers. That night I remember Fedderson was uncommon long-winded. We'd had a batch of newspapers out by the tender, and at such times the old man always made a long watch of it, getting the world straightened out. For one thing, the United States Minister to Turkey was dead. Well, from him and his soul Fedderson got on to Turkey and the Presbyterian College there, and from that to heathen in general. He rambled on and on like the surf on the ledge, whoom, 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 never coming to an end. You know how you'll be at prayers sometimes. My mind strayed. I counted the canes in the chair seat where I was kneeling. I played at a corner of the tablecloth between my fingers for a spell, and by my eyes went wandering up the back of the chair. The woman, sir, was looking at me. Her chair was back to mine, close, and both our heads were down in the shadow under the edge of the table, with Fedderson clear over on the other side by the stove. And there were her two eyes, hunting mine between the spindles in the shadow. You won't believe me, sir, but I tell you I felt like jumping to my feet and running out of the room. It was so queer. I don't know what her husband was praying about after that. His voice didn't mean anything, no more than the seas on the ledge away down there. I went to work to count the canes in the seat again, but all my eyes were on the top of my head. It got so I couldn't stand it. We were at the Lord's Prayer, saying a sing-song together, when I had to look up again. And there her 2 eyes were, between the spindles, hunting mine. Just then all of us were saying, "Forgive us our trespasses." I thought of it afterward. When we got up, she was turned the other way, but I couldn't help seeing her cheeks were red. It was terrible. I wondered if Fedderson would notice, though I might have known he wouldn't. Not him. He was in too much of a hurry to get at his Jacob's letter, and then he had to tell me for the 10th time what the inspector had said that day about getting him another light. Kingdom Come, maybe, he said. I made some excuse or other and got away. Once in the storeroom, I sat down on my cot and stayed there a long time, feeling queerer than anything. I read a chapter in the Bible, I don't know why. After I'd got my boots off, I sat with them in my hands for as much as an hour, I guess, staring at the oil tank and its lopsided shadow on the wall. I tell you, sir, I was shocked. I was only 22, remember, and I was shocked and horrified. And when I did turn in finally, I didn't sleep at all well. 2 or 3 times I came to, sitting straight up in bed. Once I got up and opened the outer door to have a look. The water was like glass, dim, without a breath of wind, and the moon just going down. Over on the black shore I made out 2 lights in a village, like a pair of eyes watching. Lonely? Why, yes, lonely and nervous. I had a horror of her, sir. The dinghy boat hung on its davits just there in front of the door, and for a minute I had an awful hankering to climb into it, lower away, and row off, no matter where. It sounds foolish. Well, it seemed foolish next morning, with the sun shining and everything as usual, Fedderson sucking his pen and wagging his head over his eternal log, and his wife down in the rocker with her head in the newspaper, and her breakfast work still waiting. I guess that jarred it out of me more than anything else. Sight of her slouched down there, with her stringy yellow hair and her dusty apron, and the pale back of her neck, reading the society notes. Society notes! Think of it! For the first time since I came to Seven Brothers, I wanted to laugh. I guess I did laugh when I went aloft to clean the lamp, and found everything so free and breezy, gulls flying high, and little whitecaps making under a westerly. It was like feeling a big load dropped off your shoulders. Fedderson came up with his dust rag and cocked his head at me. "What's the matter, Ray?" said he. "Nothing," said I, and then I couldn't help it. "Seems kind of out of place for society notes," said I, "out here at Seven Brothers." He was the other side of the lens, and when he looked at me he had 1,000 eyes, all sober. For a minute I thought he was going on dusting, but then he came out and sat down on the sill. "Sometimes," said he, "I get to thinking it may be a mite dull for her out here. She's pretty young, Ray. Not much more'n a girl, hardly." "Not much more'n a girl?" It gave me a turn, sir, as though I'd see my aunt in short dresses. "It's a good home for her, though," he went on slow. "I've seen a lot worse ashore, Ray. Of course, if I could get a shore light—" "Kingdom Come's a shore light." He looked at me out of his deep-set eyes, and then he turned them around the light-room, where he'd been so long. "No," said he, wagging his head. "It ain't for such as me." I never saw so humble a man. "But, look here," he went on, more cheerful. "As I was telling her just now, a month from yesterday's our 4th anniversary, and I'm going to take her ashore for the day, and give her a holiday, new hat and everything. A girl wants a mite of excitement now and then, Ray." There it was again, that girl. It gave me the fidgets, sir. I had to do something about it. It's close quarters for last names in a light, and I'd taken to calling him Uncle Matt soon after I came. Now, when I was at table at noon, I spoke over to where she was standing by the stove, getting him another helper of chowder. "I guess I'll have some too, Aunt Anna," said I, matter of fact. She never said a word nor gave a sign, just stood there, kind of round-shouldered, dipping the chowder. And that night at prayers I hitched my chair round the table, with its back the other way. You get awful lazy in a lighthouse some ways. No matter how much tinkering you've got, there's still a lot of time, and there is such a thing as too much reading. The changes in weather get monotonous too, by and by. The light burns the same on a thick night as it does on a fair one. Of course, there's the ships, northbound, southbound, windjammers, freighters, passenger boats full of people. In the watches at night you can see the lights go by, and wonder what they are, how they're laden, where they'll fetch up and all. I used to do that almost every evening, when it was my first watch, sitting out on the walk around up there, with my legs hanging over the edge, and my chin propped on the railing, lazy. The Boston boat was the prettiest to see, with her 3 tiers of portholes lit like a string of pearls wrapped round and round a woman's neck. Well away, too, for the ledge must have made a couple of 100 fathoms off the light, like a white dog tooth of a breaker, even on the darkest night. Well, I was lolling there one night, as I say, watching the Boston boat go by, not thinking of anything special, when I heard the door on the other side of the tower open, and footsteps coming around to me. By and by I nodded toward the boat, and passed the remark that she was fetching in uncommon close tonight. No answer. I made nothing of that, for oftentimes Fedderson wouldn't answer, and after I'd watched the lights crawling on through the darkest spell, just to make conversation, I said I guess there'd be a bit of weather before long. I've noticed, said I, when there's weather coming on, and the wind in the northeast, you can hear the orchestra playing aboard her, just over there. I make it out now. Do you? Yes. Oh, yes. I hear it all right. You can imagine I started. It wasn't him, but her. And there was something in the way she said that speech, sir, something, well, unnatural, like a hungry animal snapping at a person's hand. I turned and looked at her sidewise. She was standing by the railing, leaning a little outward, the top of her from the waist picked out bright by the lens behind her. I didn't know what in the world to say, and yet I had a feeling I ought not to sit there mum. I wonder, said I, what that captain's thinking of, fetching in so handy tonight. It's no way. I tell you, if it wasn't for this light, she'd go to work and pile up on the ledge some thick night. She turned at that, and stared straight into the lens. I didn't like the look of her face. Somehow, with its edges cut hard all around, and its 2 eyes closed down to slits like a cat's, it made a kind of mask. And then, I went on, uneasy enough, and then where'd all their music be of a sudden, and their goings-on, and their singing, and dancing? She clipped me off so quick it took my breath. Dancing? Said I. That's dance music, said she. She was looking at the boat again. How do you know? I felt I had to keep on talking. Well, sir, she laughed. I looked at her. She had on a shawl of some stuff or other that shined in the light. She had it pulled tight around her with her 2 hands in front at her breast, and I saw her shoulders swaying in tune. How do I know? She cried. Then she laughed again, the same kind of a laugh. It was queer, sir, to see her and to hear her. She turned as quick as that, and leaned towards me. Don't you know how to dance, Ray? Said she. No, I managed, and I was going to say Aunt Anna, but the thing choked in my throat. I tell you, she was looking square at me all the time with her 2 eyes, and moving with the music as if she didn't know it. By heavens, sir, it came over me of a sudden that she wasn't so bad looking after all. I guess I must have sounded like a fool. You see, said I, she's cleared the rip there now, and the music's gone. You hear? Yes, said she, turning back slow. That's where it stops, every night, night after night. It stops just there, at the rip. When she spoke again, her voice was different. I never heard the like of it, thin and taut as a thread. It made me shiver, sir. I hate them, that's what she said. I hate them all. I'd like to see 'em dead. I'd love to see 'em torn apart on the rocks night after night. I could bathe my hands in their blood, night after night. And do you know, sir, I saw it with my own eyes, her hands moving in each other above the rail. But it was her voice, though. I didn't know what to do or what to say, so I poked my head through the railing and looked down at the water. I don't think I'm a coward, sir, but it was like a cold, ice-cold hand taking hold of my beating heart. When I looked up, finally, she was gone. By and by I went in and had a look at the lamp, hardly knowing what I was about. Then, seeing by my watch it was time for the old man to come on duty, I started to go below. In the Seven Brothers, you understand, the stair goes down in a spiral through a well against the south wall, and first there's the door to the keeper's room, and then you come to another, and that's the living room, and then down to the storeroom. And at night, if you don't carry a lantern, it's as black as the pit. Well, down I went, sliding my hand along the rail, and as usual I stopped to give a rap on the keeper's door, in case he was taking a nap after supper. Sometimes he did. I stood there, blind as a bat, with my mind still up on the walk-around. There was no answer to my knock. I hadn't expected any. Just from habit, and with my right foot already hanging down for the next step, I reached out to give the door one more tap for luck. Do you know, sir, my hand didn't fetch up on anything. The door had been there a second before, and now the door wasn't there. My hand just went on, going through the dark, on, and I didn't seem to have sense or power enough to stop it. There didn't seem any air in the well to breathe, and my ears were drumming to the surf. That's how scared I was. And then my hand touched the flesh of a face, and something in the dark said, "Oh," no louder than a sigh. Next thing I knew, sir, I was down in the living room, warm and yellow-lit, with Fedderson cocking his head at me across the table, where he was at that eternal Jacob's ladder of his. "What's the matter, Ray?" said he. "Lord's sake, Ray!" "Nothing," said I. Then I think I told him I was sick. That night I wrote a letter to A.L. Peters, the grain dealer in Duxbury, asking for a job, even though it wouldn't go ashore for a couple of weeks. Just the writing of it made me feel better. It's hard to tell you how those 2 weeks went by. I don't know why, but I felt like hiding in a corner all the time. I had to come to meals, but I didn't look at her, though, not once, unless it was by accident. Fedderson thought I was still ailing, and nagged me to death with advice and so on. One thing I took care not to do, I can tell you, and that was to knock on his door, till I'd made certain he wasn't below in the living room, though I was tempted to. Yes, sir, that's a queer thing, and I wouldn't tell you if I hadn't set out to give you the truth. Night after night, stopping there on the landing in that black pit, the air gone out of my lungs, and the surf drumming in my ears, and sweat standing cold on my neck, and one hand lifting up in the air. God forgive me, sir. Maybe I did wrong not to look at her more, drooping about her work, in her gingham apron, with her hair stringing. When the inspector came off with the tender that time, I told him I was through. That's when he took the dislike to me, I guess, for he looked at me kind of sneering and said, soft as I was, I'd have to put up with it till next relief. And then, said he, there'd be a whole house-cleaning at Seven Brothers, because he'd gotten Fedderson the berth at Kingdom Come. And with that he slapped the old man on the back. I wish you could have seen Fedderson, sir. He sat down on my cot as if his knees had given way. Happy? You'd think he'd be happy, with all his dreams come true. Yes, he was happy, beaming all over. For a minute. And then, sir, he began to shrivel up. It was like seeing a man cut down in his prime before your eyes. He began to wag his head. No, said he. No, it's not for such as me. I'm good enough for Seven Brothers, and that's all, Mr. Bayliss. That's all. And for all the inspector could say, that's what he stuck to. He'd figured himself a martyr so many years, nursed that injustice like a mother with her firstborn, sir, and now in his old age, so to speak, they weren't to rob him of it. Fedderson was going to wear out his life in a second-class light, and folks would talk. That was his idea. I heard him hailing down as the tender was casting off. See you tomorrow, Mr. Bayliss. Yep. Coming ashore with the wife for a spree. Anniversary. Yep. But he didn't sound much like a spree. They had robbed him, partly, after all. I wondered what she thought about it. I didn't know till night. She didn't show up to supper, which Fedderson and I got ourselves. Had a headache, he said. It was my early watch. I went and lit up, and came back to read a spell. He was finishing off the Jacob's ladder, and thoughtful, like a man that's lost a treasure. Once or twice I caught him looking about the room on the sly. It was pathetic, sir. Going up the second time, I stepped out on the walk-around to have a look at things. She was there, on the seaward side, wrapped in that silky thing. A fair sea was running across the ledge, and it was coming on a little thick. Not too thick. Off to the right, the Boston boat was blowing. Vroom, vroom, creeping up on us, quarter speed. There was another fellow behind her, and a fisherman's conch, farther offshore. I don't know why, but I stopped beside her and leaned on the rail. She didn't appear to notice me one way or another. We stood and we stood, listening to the whistles, and the longer we stood, the more it got on my nerves, her not noticing me. I suppose she'd been too much on my mind lately. I began to be put out. I scraped my feet. I coughed. By and by I said out loud, "Look here, I guess I'd better get out the foghorn and give those fellows a toot." "Why?" said she, without moving her head, calm as that. "Why?" It gave me a turn, sir. For a minute I stared at her. "Why? Because if she don't pick up this light before many minutes, she'll be too close in to wear. Tide'll have her on the rocks. That's why." I couldn't see her face, but I could see one of her silk shoulders lift a little, like a shrug. And there I kept on staring at her, a dumb one, sure enough. I know what brought me to was hearing the Boston boat's 3 sharp toots as she picked up the light, mad as anything, and swung her helm a port. I turned away from her, sweat stringing down my face, and walked around to the door. It was just as well, too, for the feed pipe was plugged in the lamp, and the wicks were popping. She'd have been out in another 5 minutes, sir. When I'd finished, I saw that woman standing in the doorway. Her eyes were bright. I had a horror of her, sir, a living horror. "If only the light had been out," said she, low and sweet. "God forgive you," said I. "You don't know what you're saying." She went down the stair into the well, winding out of sight, and as long as I could see her, her eyes were watching mine. When I went myself, after a few minutes, she was waiting for me on that first landing, standing still in the dark. She took hold of my hand, though I tried to get it away. "Good-bye," said she in my ear. "Good-bye?" said I. I didn't understand. "You heard what he said today, about Kingdom Come. Be it so, on his own head. I'll never come back here. Once I set foot ashore, I've got friends in Brightonborough, Ray." I got away from her and started on down, but I stopped. "Brightonborough?" I whispered back. "Why do you tell me?" My throat was raw to the words, like a saw. "So you'd know," said she. Well, sir, I saw them off next morning, down that new Jacob's ladder into the dinghy boat, her in a dress of blue velvet, and him in his best cutaway and derby, rowing away, smaller and smaller, the two of them. And then I went back and sat on my cot, leaving the door open and the ladder still hanging down the wall, along with the boatfalls. I don't know whether it was relief or what. I suppose I must have been worked up even more than I'd thought those past weeks, for now it was all over I was like a rag. I got down on my knees, sir, and prayed to God for the salvation of my soul, and when I got up and climbed to the living-room it was 12:30 by the clock. There was rain on the windows, and the sea was running blue-black under the sun. I'd sat there all that time not knowing there was a squall. It was funny. The glass stood high, but those black squalls kept coming and going all afternoon, while I was at work up in the light-room, and I worked hard to keep myself busy. First thing I knew it was 5, and no sign of the boat yet. It began to get dim and kind of purplish grey over the land. The sun was down. I lit up, made everything snug, and got out the night glasses to have another look for that boat. He'd said he intended to get back before 5. No sign. And then, standing there, it came over me that of course he wouldn't be coming off. He'd be hunting her, poor old fool. It looked like I had to stand 2 men's watches that night. Never mind. I felt like myself again, even if I hadn't had any dinner or supper. Pride came to me that night on the walk around, watching the boats go by. Little boats, big boats, the Boston boat with all her pearls and her dance music. They couldn't see me, they didn't know who I was, but to the last of them they depended on me. They say a man must be born again. Well, I was born again. I breathed deep in the wind. Dawn broke hard and red as a dying coal. I put out the light and started to go below. Born again, yes, sir. I felt so good I whistled in the well, and when I came to the first door on the stair I reached out in the dark to give it a rap for luck. And then, sir, the hair prickled all over my scalp when I found my hand just going on and on through the air, the same as it had gone once before, and all of a sudden I wanted to yell, because I thought I was going to touch flesh. It's funny what their just forgetting to close their door did to me, isn't it? Well, I reached for the latch and pulled it to with a bang, and ran down as if a ghost was after me. I got up some coffee and bread and bacon for breakfast. I drank the coffee, but somehow I couldn't eat, all along of that open door. The light in the room was blood. I got to thinking. I thought how she'd talked about those men, women, and children on the rocks, and how she'd made to bathe her hands over the rail. I almost jumped out of my chair then. It seemed for a wink she was there beside the stove, watching me with that queer half-smile. Really, I seemed to see her for a flash across the red tablecloth in the red light of dawn. "Look here," said I to myself, sharp enough, and then I gave myself a good laugh and went below. There I took a look out of the door, which was still open, with the ladder hanging down. I made sure to see the poor old fool come pulling around the point before very long now. My boots were hurting a little, and, taking them off, I lay down on the cot to rest, and somehow I went to sleep. I had horrible dreams. I saw her again, standing in that blood-red kitchen, and she seemed to be washing her hands, and the surf on the ledge was winding up the tower, louder and louder all the time, and what it whined was, "Night after night, night after night." What woke me was cold water in my face. The storeroom was in gloom. That scared me at first. I thought night had come, and remembered the light. But then I saw the gloom was of a storm. The floor was shining wet, and the water in my face was spray, flung up through the open door. When I ran to close it, it almost made me dizzy to see the grey and white breakers marching past. The land was gone, the sky shut down heavy overhead. There was a piece of wreckage on the back of a swell, and the Jacob's ladder was carried clean away. How that sea had picked up so quick I can't think. I looked at my watch, and it wasn't 4 in the afternoon yet. When I closed the door, sir, it was almost dark in the storeroom. I'd never been in the light before in a gale of wind. I wondered why I was shivering so, till I found it was the floor below me shivering, and the walls and stair. Horrible crunchings and grindings ran away up the tower, and now and then there was a great thud somewhere, like a cannon shot in a cave. I tell you, sir, I was alone, and I was in a mortal fright for a minute or so. And yet I had to get myself together. There was the light up there, not tended to, and an early dark coming on, and a heavy night and all, and I had to go. And I had to pass that door. You'll say it's foolish, sir, and maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was because I hadn't eaten. But I began thinking of that door up there the minute I set foot on the stair, and all the way up through that howling dark well I dreaded to pass it. I told myself I wouldn't stop. I didn't stop. I felt the landing underfoot, and I went on, 4 steps, 5, and then I couldn't. I turned and went back. I put out my hand, and it went on into nothing. That door, sir, was open again. I left it be. I went on up to the light room and set to work. It was bedlam there, sir, screeching bedlam, but I took no notice. I kept my eyes down. I trimmed those 7 wicks, sir, as neat as ever they were trimmed. I polished the brass till it shone, and I dusted the lens. It wasn't till that was done that I let myself look back to see who it was, standing there, half out of sight in the well. It was her, sir. "Where'd you come from?" I asked. I remember my voice was sharp. "Up Jacob's ladder," said she, and hers was like the syrup of flowers. I shook my head. I was savage, sir. "The ladder's carried away." "I cast it off," said she, with a smile. "Then," said I, "you must have come while I was asleep." Another thought came on me, heavy as a ton of lead. "And where's he?" said I. "Where's the boat?" "He's drowned," said she, as easy as that. "And I let the boat go adrift. You wouldn't hear me when I called." "But look here," said I, "if you came through the storeroom, why didn't you wake me up? Tell me that." It sounds foolish enough, me standing like a lawyer in court, trying to prove she couldn't be there. She didn't answer for a moment. I guess she sighed, though I couldn't hear for the gale, and her eyes grew soft, sir, so soft. "I couldn't," said she. "You looked so peaceful, dear one." My cheeks and neck went hot, sir, as if a warm iron was laid on them. I didn't know what to say. I began to stammer. "What do you mean?" But she was going back down the stair, out of sight. My God, sir, and I used not to think she was good-looking. I started to follow her. I wanted to know what she meant. Then I said to myself, if I don't go, if I wait here, she'll come back. And I went to the weather side and stood looking out of the window. Not that there was much to see. It was growing dark, and the 7 brothers looked like the mane of a running horse, a great, vast, white horse running into the wind. The air was a welter with it. I caught one peep of a fisherman, lying down flat, trying to weather the ledge, and I said, "God help them all tonight." And then I went hot at the sound of that God. I was right about her, though. She was back again. I wanted her to speak first, before I turned, but she wouldn't. I didn't hear her go out. I didn't know what she was up to till I saw her coming outside on the walk-around, drenched wet already. I pounded on the glass for her to come in and not be a fool. If she heard, she gave no sign of it. There she stood, and there I stood, watching her. Lord, sir, was it just that I'd never had eyes to see? Or are there women who bloom? Her clothes were shining on her like a carving, and her hair was let down like a golden curtain, tossing and streaming in the gale. And there she stood with her lips half open, drinking, and her eyes half closed, gazing straight away over the 7 brothers, and her shoulders swaying as if in tune with the wind and water and all the ruin. And when I looked at her hands over the rail, sir, they were moving in each other as if they bathed. And then I remembered, sir. A cold horror took me. I knew now why she had come back again. She wasn't a woman. She was a devil. I turned my back on her. I said to myself, "It's time to light up. You've got to light up." Like that, over and over, out loud. My hand was shivering so I could hardly find a match, and when I scratched it, it only flared a second and then went out in the back-draught from the open door. She was standing in the doorway, looking at me. It's queer, sir, but I felt like a child caught in mischief. I was going to light up, I managed to say, finally. "Why?" said she. No, I can't say it as she did. "Why?" said I. "My God!" She came nearer, laughing as if with pity, low, you know. "Your God? And who is your God? What is God? What is anything on a night like this?" I drew back from her. All I could say anything about was the light. "Why not the dark?" said she. "Dark is softer than light, tenderer, dearer than light. From the dark up here, away up here in the wind and storm, we can watch the ships go by, you and I. And you love me so. You've loved me so long, Ray." "I never have," I struck out at her. "I don't! I don't!" Her voice was lower than ever, but there was the same laughing pity in it. "Oh, yes, you have." And she was near me again. "I have?" I yelled. "I'll show you. I'll show you if I have." I got another match, sir, and scratched it on the brass. I gave it to the first wick, the little wick that's inside all the others. It bloomed like a yellow flower. "I have!" I yelled, and gave it to the next. Then there was a shadow, and I saw she was leaning beside me, her 2 elbows on the brass, her 2 arms stretched out above the wicks, her bare forearms, and wrists and hands. I gave a gasp. "Take care! You'll burn them, for God's sake!" She didn't move or speak. The match burned my fingers and went out, and all I could do was stare at those arms of hers, helpless. I'd never noticed her arms before. They were rounded and graceful and covered with a soft down, like a breath of gold. Then I heard her speaking close to my ear. "Pretty arms," she said. "Pretty arms." I turned. Her eyes were fixed on mine. They seemed heavy, as if with sleep, and yet between their lids there were two wells, deep and deep, and as if they held all the things I'd ever thought or dreamt in them. I looked away from them, at her lips. Her lips were red as poppies, heavy with redness. They moved, and I heard them speaking. "Poor boy, you love me so, and you want to kiss me, don't you?" "No," said I. But I couldn't turn around. I looked at her hair. I'd always thought it was stringy hair. Some hair curls naturally with damp, they say, and perhaps that was it, for there were pearls of wet on it, and it was thick and shimmering around her face, making soft shadows by the temples. There was green in it, queer strands of green like braids. "What is it?" said I. "Nothing but weed," said she, with that slow, sleepy smile. Somehow or other I felt calmer than I had any time. "Look here," said I. "I'm going to light this lamp." I took out a match, scratched it, and touched the third wick. The flame ran around, bigger than the other two together, but still her arms hung there. I bit my lip. "By God, I will," said I to myself, and I lit the fourth. It was fierce, sir, fierce, and yet those arms never trembled. I had to look around at her. Her eyes were still looking into mine, so deep and deep, and her red lips were still smiling with that queer, sleepy droop. The only thing was that tears were raining down her cheeks, big, glowing round, jeweled tears. It wasn't human, sir. It was like a dream. "Pretty arms," she sighed, and then, as if those words had broken something in her heart, there came a great sob bursting from her lips. To hear it drove me mad. I reached to drag her away, but she was too quick, sir. She cringed from me and slipped out from between my hands. It was like she faded away, sir, and went down in a bundle, nursing her poor arms and mourning over them with those terrible broken sobs. The sound of them took the manhood out of me. You'd have been the same, sir. I knelt down beside her on the floor and covered my face. "Please," I moaned. "Please, please." That's all I could say. I wanted her to forgive me. I reached out a hand, blind for forgiveness, and I couldn't find her anywhere. I'd hurt her so, and she was afraid of me, sir, who loved her so deep it drove me crazy. I could see her down the stair, though it was dim and my eyes were filled with tears. I stumbled after her, crying, "Please, please!" The little wicks I'd lit were blowing in the wind from the door and smoking the glass beside them black. One went out. I pleaded with them the same as I would plead with a human being. I said I'd be back in a second. I promised. And I went on down the stair, crying like a baby, because I'd hurt her, and she was afraid of me. Of me, sir. She'd gone into her room. The door was closed against me, and I could hear her sobbing beyond it, broken-hearted. My heart was broken too. I beat on the door with my palms. I begged her to forgive me. I told her I loved her. And all the answer was that sobbing in the dark. And then I lifted the latch and went in, groping, pleading. "Dearest, please, because I love you." I heard her speak down near the floor. There wasn't any anger in her voice, nothing but sadness and despair. "No," said she. "You don't love me, Ray. You never have." "I do. I have." "No, no," said she, as if she was tired out. "Where are you?" I was groping for her, I thought, and lit a match. She had got to the door and was standing there as if ready to fly. I went toward her, and she made me stop. She took my breath away. "I heard your arms," said I, in a dream. "No," said she, hardly moving her lips. She held them out to the match's light for me to look, and there was never a scar on them. Not even that soft golden down was singed, sir. You can't hurt my body, said she, sad as anything. Only my heart, Ray, my poor heart. I tell you again, she took my breath away. I lit another match. How can you be so beautiful? I wondered. She answered in riddles, but oh, the sadness of her, sir. Because, said she, I've always so wanted to be. How come your eyes so heavy? Said I. Because I've seen so many things I never dreamt of, said she. How come your hair so thick? It's the seaweed makes it thick, said she, smiling queer. How come seaweed there? Out of the bottom of the sea. She talked in riddles, but it was like poetry to hear her, or a song. How come your lips so red? Said I. Because they've wanted so long to be kissed. Fire was on me, sir. I reached out to catch her, but she was gone, out of the door and down the stair. I followed, stumbling. I must have tripped on the turn, for I remember going through the air and fetching up with a crash, and I didn't know anything for a spell. How long I can't say. When I came to, she was there, somewhere, bending over me, crooning, my love, under her breath like a song. But then, when I got up, she was not where my arms went. She was down the stair again, just ahead of me. I followed her. I was tottering and dizzy and full of pain. I tried to catch up with her in the dark of the storeroom, but she was too quick for me, sir. Always a little too quick for me. Oh, she was cruel to me, sir. I kept bumping against things, hurting myself still worse, and it was cold and wet, and a horrible noise all the while, sir. And then, sir, I found the door was open, and the sea had parted the hinges. I don't know how it all went, sir. I'd tell you if I could, but it's all so blurred. Sometimes it seems more like a dream. I couldn't find her any more. I couldn't hear her. I went all over, everywhere. Once, I remember, I found myself hanging out of that door between the davits, looking down into those big black seas and crying like a baby. It's all riddles and blur. I can't seem to tell you much, sir. It was all, I don't know. I was talking to somebody else, not her. It was the inspector. I hardly knew it was the inspector. His face was as grey as a blanket, and his eyes were bloodshot, and his lips were twisted. His left wrist hung down, awkward. It was broken, coming aboard the light in that sea. Yes, we were in the living room. Yes, sir, it was daylight, grey daylight. I tell you, sir, the man looked crazy to me. He was waving his good arm towards the weather windows, and what he was saying over and over was this: "Look what you done, damn you! Look what you done!" And what I was saying was this: "I've lost her!" I didn't pay any attention to him, nor him to me. By and by he did, though. He stopped his talking all of a sudden, and his eyes looked like the devil's eyes. He put them up close to mine. He grabbed my arm with his good hand, and I cried, I was so weak. "Johnson," said he, "is that it? By the living God, if you got a woman out here, Johnson." "No," said I, "I've lost her." "What do you mean you lost her?" "It was dark," said I, and it's funny how my head was clearing up. "And the door was open, the storeroom door, and I was after her, and I guess she stumbled, maybe, and I lost her." "Johnson," said he, "what do you mean? You sound crazy, downright crazy. Who?" "Her," said I, "Fedderson's wife." "Who?" "Her," said I, and with that he gave my arm another jerk. "Listen," said he, like a tiger, "don't try that on me. It won't do any good, that kind of lies, not where you're going to. Fedderson and his wife, too, the both of them's drowned deader than a doornail." "I know," said I, nodding my head. I was so calm it made him wild. "You're crazy, crazy as a loon, Johnson." And he was chewing his lip red. "I know, because it was me that found the old man lying on backwater flats yesterday morning. Me. And she'd been with him in the boat, too, because it had a piece of her jacket tore off, tangled in his arm. I know, said I, nodding again, like that. You know what, you crazy, murdering fool? Those were his words to me, sir. I know, said I, what I know. And I know, said he, what I know. And there you are, sir. He's inspector. I'm nobody. End of The Woman at Seven Brothers. End of section 10 of Famous Modern Ghost Stories.